Greetings. Welcome to Confession Corner, where we deep dive into the real stories that are hidden in the depths. If you're new here, hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe. We post 3 to 4 times a week. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. What's the most creepy thing you've ever witnessed? One random night in middle school, I woke up and had the odd feeling that something or someone was present in the house and coming towards my room. I was scared, so I closed my eyes to pretend to be asleep. I could faintly hear something come in my room, and it felt like someone was standing over me, looking to make sure I was asleep. I laid on my back, eyes shut, until the feeling passed, and ended up falling asleep. I woke up in the morning to find out that our house was robbed. About 10 years ago, I worked as a camp counselor in Fishkill, New York. Our cabins were in a very isolated area, pretty deep in the woods. We always put the kids to bed around 10 p.m., and around 11, I would usually sneak out to meet this girl who also worked there. She was in an all-girls cabin about a quarter mile down the main path. I would always walk off to the side of the path so I wouldn't be seen. Then, one night, something happened that I will never forget. As I was walking through the woods, I heard rustling in a bush near me. I obviously investigated, because I was dumb and curious. I walked over and this solid black little humanoid thing jumped out and looked at me. It was about 2 to 3 feet tall, but it had perfect human proportions. I just stared at it for a second, trying to figure out what the F I was looking at. And then it bolted. It ran away on 2 legs, just like a human would. I couldn't make out any features because how dark it was, but it was incredibly fast. Not just fast, superhuman, animal fast. I thought, maybe it could have been one of our kids who snuck out. But that didn't make any sense. All our kids were 14 to 17. This thing was toddler-sized at best. I have no effing idea what I saw that night, but a lot of other strange stuff happened in those woods too. My grandparents used to own a vacation home cabin in Highlands, North Carolina. It was kind of an Airbnb before that was a thing. The place was incredibly old, built in the late 1800s. They'd found newspapers stuck in the wall during one renovation from circa 1900. The place always creeped me out, and it didn't help that my grandmother used to troll the hell out of us with ghost stories about the place. The first story was secondhand, told by my grandfather. He wasn't the type to embellish or tell tall tales like my grandmother. He had a partner that owned half the house. The guy was a pilot who flew for Delta, and his wife was a stewardess for the same airline. They were unable to have children, so they adopted a little girl. I remember her well, playing with her in the summers when I'd go up with my grandpa. They were always pretty good people, seemed down to earth. Anyway, my grandfather claims that one night they'd put her to bed, and about 30 minutes later, she started screaming bloody murder. He said the screams changed pitch, changed tone. They sounded evil. The parents ran to the room and started praying over her with a Bible. He said he walked to the edge of the door and saw her face changing shape, changing colors. She screamed in what he claimed were demonic-sounding tones. Again, he wasn't the type to tell tall tales, but he swears she'd been possessed that evening, and that after about an hour of the parents praying, she returned to her normal self. Stranger yet, the girl had always hated that house, never wanted to be there, but after that night, she always wanted to go back. My own direct experience with this place happened one summer, when I was around 10 to 12 years old. I went into the unfinished basement to explore. Off to my right was a framed, finished bathroom. There were no lights on in the basement, just what was coming through the windows at about ground level. I distinctly remember the light seeming different in the bathroom versus the rest of the basement, but there was no light source other than the sunlight. I felt curiously compelled to go look into the toilet. As I peeked in, I swear, the water turned red and started bubbling. It scared the shit out of me, and I ran the hell out, never went back down. I, too, always had a weird feeling of being watched when I was down there. This didn't happen to me, but it was a pretty big regional news story, And the hunter involved was a friend of a friend. In a nutshell, a woman went missing in a very rural area, and police and volunteers spent several days looking for her. She had some mental issues and had made suicidal comments before taking off. They never managed to find her, and after a few weeks, the case went cold. Fast forward about 2 years, a hunter is following a deer path in a remote wooded area and comes upon 2 shoes just sitting on the ground. He takes a closer look and is shocked there are feet in them. He looks up and sees the rest of the missing woman's body hanging from a tree limb. She had hanged herself, and her feet, probably weighed down by the shoes, had fallen away from her decomposing body. I had a friend in college whose mother had a lot of mental health problems. She periodically did things like try to crash the car when they were all inside. One night, I was sleeping over at my friend's house, and she told me to lock the bedroom door so her mom couldn't come in, because sometimes she did that. Well, I forgot to lock the door. I woke up in the middle of the night to see her mom standing there, in the doorway with a knife. It was a total Michael Myers-esque moment. She stood there staring at me, didn't say a word, didn't move. The knife was just in her hand, hanging down by her side. I stared back at her, waiting to see if she was going to do anything. She didn't. I got bored and eventually went back to sleep. The next morning I was like, "Hey, so your mom was lurking in my doorway last night with a knife for a while." And she was like, "OMG, what the fuck? You should have called for me." I work in an old hospital late at night and noticed the elevator doors open behind me. I then heard the clip-clop of hard-soled shoes take a few steps out my way. When I turned around, no one was there. A linen cart sat across the hallway, so I thought this person was hiding behind it. I knelt down and looked underneath it, only to see 2 shiny, old-fashioned, pointy nurse's shoes pointed my way. I eased my way around the cart to scare the person who was trying to scare me. But no one was there. I looked down and could no longer see what I thought were shoes. I'm not sure if I talked about this, but I went over to my grandparents' house one day from school. My bus stop was near their house. And as I got in through the door, I saw out the window to the backyard my nanny's dog Tara outside playing. She was just playing by the bushes and she was almost like glowing, but I thought it was just chalked up to the sun beaming on her light coat and didn't think anything of it. That was until my grandparents had to tell me that they had to put her down that morning. I came to their place in the late afternoon, long after the fact, and when I told them, they didn't believe me. Nobody in the family believed me when I said I saw Tara playing outside. To this day, I never forgot that memory and the cold chill I got from realizing she was dead. My job involved screening hours of video looking for evidence of war crimes, etc., from Syria, Yemen, Gaza, Ukraine, etc. I've seen all the ISIS videos. 2 in particular stand out in my mind. One, a public ISIS execution of a Jordanian military pilot. The guy was in an orange suit and a cage, clearly anticipating a horrible death. An ISIS terrorist went into the cage with a large canister, made the pilot kneel, doused him, and set him on fire. The really creepy thing was, as he burned to a crisp, the corpse crumpled to the ground, but a few seconds later, sat back up again, vertically on the knees. The Jordanian military was so furious they rounded up all the prisoners they had in the country with connections to ISIS and executed them. 2, ISIS terrorists rounded up some people they wanted to kill, put them in a cage suspended above a pool of sulfuric acid, then lowered them in as a camera situated under the surface of the acid recorded their deaths. Very recent story, not even a week old. Weird stuff has been happening in the house I'm staying in for months, starting when I was out of town for 2 weeks. When I'd wake up in the morning, after I'd come back from a trip, or after I'd come home from a night out, furniture had been moved, dishes had been washed, laundry had been folded, and a host of other weird things. Always good things, and nothing was ever stolen. I went through so many different possibilities. I started sleepwalking for the first time. I have carbon monoxide poisoning. There's a ghost in the house. I'm blacking out from stress. There's someone coming in and out of the house. I searched the house so many times for another person and never found anyone, and I was slowly going crazy trying to figure out what was happening. I honestly thought I was having a psychotic breakdown at one point. The pinnacle was when I woke up one morning and all of my trash had been taken outside, put inside the trash bins. The trash bins had been rolled out to the curb, and in all the trash bins inside had new bags in them. Things finally started slowing down, and things weren't being moved anymore. But I was hearing what sounded like people walking on the roof above me. My friends told me it was probably just squirrels, so I waved it off. Until last Friday when I walked upstairs at 2 a.m. and the crawl space door was wide open. I called the sheriffs, and it turned out there was homeless people living inside the walls of my house, on and off for months, right next to my bedroom. They were sneaking in through a faulty door lock and window they had broke. My wife and I were walking on a track that ran around a hospital. We had just had our daughter and were trying to get my wife some postpartum exercise. On the track, we saw an old man dressed in all black, shuffling toward us a little ways up the path. My wife and I had a short conversation about getting out of the way, both acknowledging him. It was a hilly area, and between us and the old man was a small hill. As we were walking up one side, he would be walking up the other, obscuring him from our sight until we met at the top. Only, he never made it to the top. He was just gone. We got to the top of the hill and looked all around. The man must have been 80. He had a walker. My wife and I both distinctly remember that. It was rolling grass hills on either side of the path, and he was only obscured from our sight for a few seconds. There's no way he could have gone anywhere. He just vanished. I'm a skeptic, agnostic as they come. I only believe in what I have evidence for. But my wife and I saw that with our own eyes, and I have no explanation. I used to work at a store in a building that was generally accepted to be haunted. Nearly everyone who worked there a month or more walked out with a story they couldn't explain. One slow day, I was manning the front. My manager came up and told me she was going to do some unboxing in the back. Keep the walkie on in case we need to talk. I say okay and proceed with my morning as normal. A couple minutes later, a woman's voice comes from my radio, and she is absolutely shrieking, piercing through a wall of static. I've heard radio feedback many times, and this wasn't it. It sounded like someone being murdered. I fully sprint to the back to check on my manager, thinking she'd been hurt, or worse, that some creep had figured out our back door didn't lock and snuck in. I burst in. She's fine. Has her radio on. Heard nothing. Had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. Wasn't the last time that happened during my time there? I was 7 years old and woke up in the middle of the night to go pee. Must have been around 1 a.m. There was a mirror I had to cross to reach the washroom. That area had a very weird blue lighting because of the LEDs my dad had fit on the ceiling. It made the space look creepy as hell. I, being as sleepy as I was, crossed the room and took a very quick glance at my mirror. It took me a few seconds to register what I had just seen. A small girl, messy hair, and what looked like red blood covering half of her face, from her nose to her neck. I was 7. Getting that visual in that weirdly lit horror movie lighting, I nearly pissed myself. What followed was the most glass-shattering, migraine-inducing scream one will ever hear in real life. My parents came running into the room, saw me, and freaked out. So, what had actually happened? A rat had snuck behind my bed, and somewhere around midnight had chewed on my nose. This caused my nose to bleed profusely, to the point my face was completely covered in blood and was unrecognizable. My dad found the rat behind my bed and drove it out of the house. My mom had to sleep with me that night because I was crying, hyperventilating. Not fun. I remember we had a dinner at my home that night. All of my family was there in our village. My father asked me to run the generator, which was located in the valley, about 70 meters away from our house. It was around 8 p.m. I went alone. When I finished the task and was about to walk back home, I saw my uncle. He said, "You done?" I was like, How did you get here so fast? Anyway, let's go home. I led the way. We were talking, but I wasn't paying that much attention to him. Then, we stopped talking. I was ahead, not that far from him. When I arrived home, I looked back. He wasn't there? I thought, maybe he went to his home. Maybe he stopped to light a cigarette. I went inside where the family was gathering, and then, wait a second. Uncle Allie? Weren't you supposed to be outside? I was questioning myself. The rest of the family noticed something was off. My brother smiled and said, "Yeah, don't worry, he followed you." I bought it. The next day, my cousins told me, "Your brother was lying to you. He didn't want you to be scared." So I went to my father and brother. I told them the story. They looked at me and said, "It was a jinn, ghost, but we didn't say so." My father added, "'Cause you know all about that valley and the ghosts who lived there. That one who accompanied you was protecting you, I assume." I got goosebumps, but I was relieved. It wasn't purely creepy per se, but definitely a supernatural experience I've had. I happened to be the first to drive by the scene of a one-car accident. A 20-year-old had been driving about 100 miles per hour at night, lost control, and flipped upside down off the road. Down about 10 feet, the truck was obliterated. I called 911 and ran up to help, eventually crawling through the passenger side window. I couldn't reach him or figure out a way to get him out of the wreckage. The boy looked dead. He was pretty mangled, but when I grabbed his hand and asked if he could hear me, he squeezed my hand. I could hear his breathing, but it sounded like gargling water. I told him help was coming, that I wasn't leaving, and then I just started praying. It was the only thing I could think to do. While I prayed, I said something like, "Lord, take him in your arms and be with him." And the very moment I said that, I heard a sigh. His body went completely slack. I tried talking to him, but he was gone. Then something strange happened. A feeling of complete peace washed over me. It was like I just knew I could leave, like my job there was done. The wrecked truck, its crushed cab, was suddenly filled with calmness. It wasn't an eerie stillness, just peace. I crawled out of the truck, stood up, and at that exact moment, I saw an ambulance appear around the curve. I told them I thought he had passed, but of course, they started working to free him anyway. I just sat on the grass a little ways away, still trying to process everything. Some cops came over and interviewed me. I was still there when his family arrived. One of the officers had known the boy and had called them. Watching his family show up, that was terrible. But his parents were so thankful when I told them their son didn't die alone. That at least made me feel like I had done something that mattered. Of course, I don't really know what I felt that night, but I'm fairly confident I felt his soul leave his body. And whether it was his soul, an angel, God, whoever. There was a supernatural peace after he died. I usually freak out in emergencies, or at least let my adrenaline take over. But this was different. It was unlike me to be that calm, even after I got home that night. That was 4 years ago last month, and I still think about it. I was on my way to my girlfriend's house to take her to the ballet for our anniversary. You know, the nice kind of thing you do before you actually get them to marry you. And stopped at a flower stand to buy her a bouquet. Racking up the points. Walking up, I was thinking, when did the ballet start? Was it leave at 6 p.m. for a 7 p.m. show? Or leave at 7 p.m. for an 8 p.m. show? I'm walking up to the flower stand, still trying to work it out, and a very old man sitting in the passenger seat of a car rolls down the window and says to me, 8 o'clock. I was like, what? And he says, 8 o'clock. There's a good TV show on at 8 o'clock. He closed the window and sat staring forward again. He was right, by the way. The ballet started at 8 o'clock. TLDR. Was wondering what time a show started, and a random old man, clearly suffering from dementia, shouted the answer at me. I was about 8 and walking in a field along brambles with my grandmother picking blackberries and generally having a fun time. The area was walking distance from her home, so it wasn't as if we were anywhere remote. We came across a small area kind of hidden through an archway of bushes. Inside the area and underneath an overhanging tree, really secluded and off of any kind of path, we found a shallow dug rectangle grave shape with black, burned marks inside on the dirt. I remember my grandmother just saying, "Okay, let's go home," and we went home. Later on, I heard my granddad confirming with my grandmother that it would have been the spot where the guy tried to burn the body of a girl who had been recently murdered in their town. The case had been solved, but the crime scene must have just been left as that hole. It was all over the news just before that, but I was too young to really know about it. I have that photo image of how creepy that hole was to see to this day in my memory. That's it for today's confessions. Hope you enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep going. Thanks, and see you in the next one. Toodles.